All right, welcome to GYF Virtual CPE Day 2020. Jordan and I will be speaking to you today about ERP implementation risks and pitfalls. So this is your host, Jim O'Mara. I'm a manager with GYF ERP Solutions Group. I've been with GYF for a little over 2 years and have been doing software implementations and other financial implementations for over 10 years.
My name is Jordan Curry. I'm a senior consultant with Grossman, Yannick & Ford ERP Solutions Group. I've been with GYF for 3.5 years now. I've been involved in ERP implementations for around 6 years. So we're showing this today, pre-recording this CPE day, not only because of the safety measures with COVID-19, but it's quite possible when you're listening to this presentation on November 5th that I'm holding a new baby. Also, if by chance I get a call during this webinar, you're stuck with Jim.
Good. All right, so with that said, we want to kick things off. So before we go into walking you through the project management lifecycle and some of the risks and things to watch out for within each of those phases, I wanted to start this presentation with a slide that really stuck out to me. Now, there's a couple things going on here, but first, I want you to focus on the top half of this and looking at this question: what makes a successful project? Is it a go-live date that was met? Is it that you implemented a new software and your budget was not exceeded? Is it a combination of hitting that go live and cost not being successful, or is it that merely your users adopted the system even though your date was late and your costs were exceeded? Project success is defined differently depending on what you were trying to accomplish as an organization and what your overall goals are. So with that said, is it surprising to you to read this graphic in the bottom left-hand corner that nearly 73% of projects fail? To me, that's an astonishing number. 73%. How much time and effort is spent, searching for your new software, signing an engagement letter and a project with your consultants to implement that software, and then to have that turned around and that of 73% of them failing. Next, moving over to the slide, so 97% of companies believe that project management is critical to your business success, and we would agree with that. So as I mentioned, we're going to step through the project management lifecycle, and with each of those phases, kind of explain, what are some of the risks and pitfalls to watch out for so that you're on the right side of that percentage of the 73 and you're part of that successful 27%. So as you'll see here, these are the 5 key phases of the project management lifecycle. Project initiation, initiating the project as it self-explains. This is setting up the project, organizing your team, identifying roles and resources. Moving on then to project planning, planning out the project, putting together a strong plan that you will follow throughout the project, as well as controls on that project. 3, the meat of your project, which is the project execution. How are you executing that project? What processes are in place to ensure proper execution? 4, project control and tracking, so having proper change control processes in place to ensure additional scope is not added to projects and that the proper stakeholders are engaged at appropriate times to control an increase in scope or change in project resources. And finally, project closeout. What are you doing to evaluate what has been done at the end of a project, and what processes are in place to ensure that it's properly closed out and your project does not continue to go on and on past the go live. All right, so beginning with the project initiation phase of project lifecycle. First one I want to step through is unclear business problem and/or success criteria. As you'll see on the right-hand side of this slide, I chose to pick this slide because I think it describes this bullet point well. You'll see different project team members who are running up the staircase, and another one that has a big pencil in his hand, kind of drawing his roadmap, and he's not quite at that finish line. So in this instance, this project team or this organization does not have a clear path of where they're going or what they're trying to solve in this particular project. How many times have you been on a project where you pick the software because it was the latest and greatest? You're moving from an on-premise solution, you're moving to the cloud. But what are you really trying to solve? Are you just moving to the cloud because it's the buzzword that's going on right now? Or are you really trying to solve a business problem, such as in an example of this year in 2020 with COVID, was your workforce quickly able to adapt and work remotely from anywhere as long as they had a browser? Second, lack of executive sponsor or champion on your project. So you may have a project team that has all the right proponents, you have a good schedule, and you have good project team members, but for selfish reasons, they may only care about their particular processes or getting their piece of the project done. So this is where it's very critical to have an executive sponsor, someone that takes a step back. He or she is not involved in the day-to-day details of the project, but can be that high level to really level set when there's issues, changes, or project disagreements. This is absolutely critical. For an example, we had a project last year where, again, in this example, very strong team members. The project was going well, but there was a disagreement in terms of sorry, excuse me, we lost audio there for a second. The project had team members who were fighting over, whether to proceed with this project or stay with their old system. Even though they saw the value of using the new system, they just weren't quite over that hurdle and just kept going back on using their old system due to comfort and the years that it took to get that system up and going. So at that point, we brought the executive sponsor, both from the project side, your implementation consultants, as well as your internal client side. And those executive sponsors were really able to use their level heads, realize that you made this investment in this new software, and are able to take those differences of opinions from the team members out, and then successfully get back on track for that project. Third point on this project initiation page is having multiple project managers or no project manager. Oftentimes, on the implementation team, you always have a project manager, or in most cases have a project manager. But how many times have you been on a project yourself where you as an organization did not have a project manager? You had multiple project team members who all had their pivotal role they were playing within the project, but there was really no one from your side that was playing that PM side. And when this happens, you get too caught up in your day-to-day or your specific task, but you don't have that one person on your team to act as the PM and kind of delineate when should something be done or when we should focus on this particular process, or be able to manage the different resources to get them done.
Yeah, I can't emphasize that last point enough. In doing ERP implementations, it's very important, as Jim said, to have a project manager and specify a project manager, not only with your implementation partner, but internally in your organization, someone that's able to quickly rally the troops and be able to navigate, the different situations that arise throughout the life cycle of the implementation.
All right, so moving on to the next slide, continuing additional bullets for the project initiation phase. Next one will probably ring near and dear to most of your hearts, but starting with the scope and size of the effort is underestimated. How many times did you sign, a new project or new implementation that you wanted to take on, and you thought you had everything documented, requirements done, but then as you jump into the project, things are kicked off, you start to see this new great system, and your end user starts saying they want that functionality, or we want this requirement now added after we've dived in. Too often times, it's scope is underestimated, and it can really lead to what we call a scope creep, where it gets creeped in, and if you don't have proper controls in place, which we'll talk about in a later phase coming up here, your project can quickly be spun out of control with additional requirements, leading to longer go-live dates, overburdened project team, and ultimately, increased cost. Next is unrealistic expectations of an off-the-shelf system. Here, we want to talk through, off-the-shelf system not magically being a magic bullet and fixing, bad processes. A lot of these cloud systems and on-premise systems that are there today, advertise and their marketing are saying, we can fit any industry. Our system, is the best off-the-shelf with little configuration. We can have you up and running in X. But really, even though that may be true, there may be great, pre-configuration and with the right consultants can be set up quickly, but you still need to take a step back no matter what, that system promises is to, evaluate your processes and realize, what are you trying to accomplish? No off-the-shelf system is, that magic where it's going to fix, like I said, broken processes. Next is, another favorite of mine that happens time and time again as we go through our projects. This is with the customer picking an end date without thinking through the whole project. As I point out here, don't just pick January 1st. Too often, January 1st is just picked because it's the start of a new year. It makes the most sense when you're going through a project implementation to just pick January 1st so that, you start off a full year with new data, new processes, and a new system. However, you need to think about when you're initiating your project, when contractors sign, people's schedules, and many other things that we'll talk through in the project planning phase that really determine when that project date should be. January 1st sounds great, but is it going to cause, an overburden of your resources and ultimately lead to people quitting, or are you rushing your implementation, leading to requirements being missed and an unhappy, project team, project sponsor, and an unsuccessful implementation?
Yeah, and a lot of times, as Jim said, people just say, well, it'd be great to go live next year. And then by default, it's January 1st the following year. And without considering the other events that are occurring at that, time, whether it be year-end close, year-end audit, holidays, or other, company events that, lead to not being able to meet that date. So don't limit yourself just because, it's a political statement, oh, we're going to go live on this X date. You want to make sure you build in enough time to get all the tasks completed throughout the project. Another comment just of the unrealistic expectations of the off-the-shelf system. You want to make sure that, you're picking a system that is able to meet, your requirements as well. You want to make sure that, if you have really specified operations that need to be able to be completed within the ERP system, that, there's going to be, the ability to customize it and meet that process, as well as not going too far down the customization side of the off-the-shelf system, because, that could lead to issues with, keeping up with code and changes with, the ERP as it, rolls out updates. So we're just going to pause briefly here for the first polling question. You should see the polling question appear on your screen for you to give a response. Okay, so moving on into the next phase, the project planning phase. This is, as Jim alluded to earlier, drawing the roadmap for the project. It's very important to not rush through this phase of the project and make sure you spend enough time to truly dive through the requirements and the amount of time and the schedules that need to be planned out to make sure that you have a successful project. Some areas where we see being rushed through, first one, project plan is insufficient. So a lot of times you'll have a project plan in Microsoft project plan or in Excel. It's important to, we want to have a high level view of the project plan, so we have a good roadmap with the key dates and milestones that need to be met in order to meet the go live date, but as well have a lower level drill down ability to be able to build in sufficient tasks that need to be completed in order to go live with the project. So it's important to, it's kind of a push-pull between, quick detail, mainline information that you're able to quickly see, the overall goal of the project, but also have, lower level tasks, a view of those that need to be completed and assigned to members in your project team. So another key phase in the project planning is developing the initial requirements. Inadequate requirements can really hurt you throughout the the life of the project. Some issues we see around not having adequate requirements is the actual end users of the system aren't brought in early enough to be able to determine what those requirements are. For instance, if you're a manufacturing company, you have somebody that's heavily involved in the operations of in the manufacturing within your company is also developing the requirements for the sales cycle. Obviously, that's going to be an issue because they're going to have different perspectives, different business requirements. So you want to make sure you get everybody involved early in the process to be able to make sure that those critical business needs, those critical business tasks are being vetted out initially and put on a requirement, so we make sure that is captured within the project plan. In this phase, in developing the requirements, it can often be a frustrating time. That's why a lot of times we see it be rushed through because, again, of those different perspectives of what should occur. But, it's a very important, item to get right because this will critically affect your project's success. And it is important to be as detailed as possible with your requirements. You cannot be too detailed in this phase because, the more detail that you have in your requirements, the more key processes that are going to be met. So another thing in the project planning phase is unrealistic schedules. So as Jim alluded to, how many times, are we overly optimistic with our time estimates about how much time it's going to take to do something? It might take you that much time to do something, but remember, we're working in a team. So we need to make sure that everybody on the team is in the same page and everybody has enough time to not only do their individual tasks, but to get buy-in from the rest of the organization for those tasks. So it's important to be realistic with your time estimates, and sometimes I say, you think it's going to take out 8 hours? It's going to take 10. So just make sure you build in, enough time to be able to complete the tasks. A lot of times with kicking off, projects, ERP solution projects, you'll see standard project templates with baked-in time estimates for how much time it's going to take to complete tasks. This is good. This provides great feedback for best practice and suggestions about how much time a task is going to take, but this can also vary greatly depending on what type of business you are, what type of size of your business. For instance, if it's heavily, there's a heavily customized process, obviously the requirements for that, and the actual walkthrough and the build out of that, of the scope of that, you know, particular area is going to take more time than your standard, you know, native process to the system. So you want to make sure that you're also looking at those, you know, those standard templates and making sure that, you know, you're adding in more time for the areas that are going to be specific to your business. So as Jim alluded to earlier too, it's very common practice we see to have this predetermined target date and then work back with all the tasks that need to be completed. And that kind of squeezes all the individual tasks and, you know, well, it's going to take, you know, this amount of time. It's best practice, as Jim said, to make sure that you take a top-down approach where you get the project plan, you build out, you know, the steps to the go-live date, and you set the go-live date when it's realistic, you know, regardless of when that is, because, you know, that, again, will lead to more of a successful and set the expectation correctly up front with your go-live date.
One thing I want to add here that stuck out to me is the bullet point regarding the inadequate requirements. So as Jordan alluded to, you can never have enough details on these, and it's very important to have very detailed requirements, especially upfront during the project planning phase. You may have had the right people involved, and they may have documented or handed over the requirements to the appropriate project manager on both the implementation side as well as the client side, but are those requirements detailed enough? In one example, you know, we were asked, can your system produce an ACH nacho file for paying of vendors? Of course, you know, most systems out there, or if not all, can adequately produce an ACH nacho file for paying of vendors. However, as we dove into the project and after doing some walkthroughs, you know, we learned that their actual requirement was they have 7 different subsidiaries. Each of those subsidiaries have different bank accounts that they're going to be paying out of. And for those vendors that they're paying, they also have multiple subsidiaries or multiple bank accounts that they need to hit. So really the requirement should have been the ability to create multiple nacho files, one for each subsidiary, and within those subsidiaries, which bank account needs to be chosen. So the simple requirement of saying the ability to create nacho file was not actually meeting the goals. It's really going down to the next level. You know, what type of nacho file, an ACH, do I need to produce, and what are my different scenarios of that? So really getting down to those details is what you need to be successful in documenting those requirements to ensure project success.
Okay, so this is going to be polling question 2. Again, the prompt is going to appear on your screen. Go ahead and provide a response. Okay, so moving on to the project execution phase. This is the detailed design, development, and the implementation of the project. This is where a lot of times the project team and the implementation team is most comfortable once all of the requirements have been laid out, the project plan has been laid out. This is actually delivering the ERP solution. So throughout the project execution phase, it's important to, again, have consistent, clear communication. A pitfall we see is limited communication and information flow. So what do we mean by that? Having weekly status reports or weekly status, emails throughout the project team, make sure that everyone in the project team has a clear understanding of what the priorities are. If people don't have a clear understanding of what the priorities are for your organization and for the implementation, it can sometimes lead to frustration because things are being prioritized above, other things based on the current, stage you are in the project. And, some users are, getting impatient or, anxious to get to their process. So it's just important to make sure that you have clear, consistent communication throughout the project, making sure everybody stays on the same page. So inadequate resources. Can't stress that enough. You know, at the beginning of a project, as part of the initial project planning phase, you lay out the holidays, PTO schedules, big events that are coming up that are going to limit your ability to have resources. To make sure at the beginning you have all of the proper people in place to be able to complete all of the tasks that are necessary for an ERP system implementation. For instance, a lot of times we'll see companies, this is a great time to kick off an internship, to have the intern be able to do a lot of the data migration activities, cleansing of data that are necessary, to do an implementation. It's also, you bring in the intern to assist with some day-to-day operations. So it's a great time to look at that, to bring in an intern, for the project. So another area is process violated. What do we mean? Quality assurance. So again, we've laid out our requirements and in the project phase, and now we're actually developing those business processes. We want to ensure that there's appropriate documentation and sign off on those business processes as they're being completed. Make sure that, again, the end users are the ones that are performing the sign off, or the super user or department leader that is signing off on each business requirement, to make sure that, day one in the new system, you're able to, perform the necessary, business functions that you need. You want to make sure that, again, as Jim alluded to earlier, that users are staying on task and sticking to the original scope of a project. Again, with a lot of out-of-the-box ERP systems and ERP systems in general, there's a lot of functionality within the system, a lot of ability to customize to meet a specific business requirement. It's important to stick to your original project plan, because adding functionality could lead to you spending time, or users spending time in areas where weren't originally part of the original project plan. So it's important to make sure you're sticking to the original scope of the engagement. And again, we're not saying you don't want to implement these more specific, more customized, more additional functionality that you may want and need. It's just, let's make sure we, again, set the priority, make sure that priority is completed, and then maybe reprioritize things to more of a second phase rollout.
One thing I want to add on this slide is going back to the second bullet here, inadequate resources. Having adequate resources is not just a number that's quantified. It's not having 6 resources for the 6 key processes that are in scope. It's having the right person for each of those processes. Jordan mentioned, some companies elect to bring in interns or other type of staff supplement, but really what we've seen as a successful practice is, those resources actually take on the day-to-day work, so that the end user who's performing those can actually focus their time on the project itself. So it's really a balance of figuring out, where does that supplemental work help, and how do you get the right resources assigned to the project so they can both do their day job and successfully, engage in the project.
Yeah, exactly as Jim said, you want to make sure the people that are going to be ultimately responsible for the process that is delivered are the ones that are developing and seeing to the requirements being met. Okay, so continuing on with the project execution. So one bullet here that is near and dear to Jim and I's heart and it's becoming more and more prominent, with technology and COVID and working from home. It's important to have, system integrations. So what do we mean with system integrations? You have multiple different systems or platforms that you're using to complete your process. Not only just the ERP system, but you might have payment processing, partners, websites, shipping platforms, specific warehouse operation type systems. You want to make sure that early on in your, requirements mapping in your project planning that you have a good system map of all the systems that are involved in your process. And if it is important to have a integration with that system to be able to, meet your business requirements, that you have a plan and a system that is going to be able to, meet that requirement. So when looking for an ERP solution, it's important to, select a solution that's going to be able to integrate with either a specialized system that you need, or have another partner that's going to be able to mirror basically that need for the system integration. So I can't say enough about how many times you get into an implementation and after going through the process walkthroughs, or the situation where arises where we realize, hey, they have this shipping platform that needs to be automatically sent from the ERP solution. So there's an additional thing that needs to be, again, built into the project plan, so we're able to accommodate that system integration. So testing interval is reduced. So again, talk about rushing through areas in the project plan. This is one, again, that we often see getting squeezed in the project as other requirements are coming up. You want to make sure that you allow enough time to adequately vet out your processes and test them, and again, get sign-off for those processes to make sure that, day one, again, that you're going to be able to meet those specific business processes. So again, you want to make sure that you have sign-off from end users after the testing is completed, user acceptance, testing, sign-off, to make sure that, again, we're all in agreement that the process is correct and we're able to move it, to a live environment. Another area where we see, some pitfalls in the project lifecycle is ineffective prioritization of processes. So again, you have multiple different viewpoints of what the priorities are, in your organization. Again, the sales leads are going to have different priorities than people that are heavily involved in operations or accounting, or IT. So there's going to be, your project team is going to have different priorities that all need to be addressed in the project. But it's important to identify what the critical business needs are and make sure those get addressed in a timely fashion, and prioritize those, above other things that might not be as critical for day one success in the new solution. For example, if it's a manufacturing company, a critical business need is going to be making sure that you can effectively build your assembly items day one. So that's something that, immediately that you're going to want to make sure is escalated to a critical priority to be met in the system.
One thing I'll just add here, again, Jordan, is that sticks out to me is the testing interval being reduced. Time and time again, we see this as the phase that unfortunately, gets missed, gets reduced, or whatever have you not. And this goes back to what we've been saying all along throughout the various phases of the project management lifecycle. Really think about the date that you're picking as your go live, what everyone's schedules are, and who is involved in the project. You know, too often you get on, requirements are added, and you know, the project stalls, and you eventually pick your go live date, and you just have not done enough testing. You know, you go live, and then you figure out, you know, 3 weeks after your go live, your supposed go live date, that, you know, your requirements just haven't been met, not enough testing was performed, and ultimately you're redoing work, you're re-engaging your consultants, you're spending additional time with, you know, your team members, and overall it's just not a good look for your project and your organization. So no matter how much, you know, your project team, whether it's your consultants or internally, you know, say, oh, it's fine, we can test this, or we've tested this, you need clear proof and documentation that, you know, all your requirements that you agreed to during that initiation and planning phase, you know, they were vetted, tested, and have proper sign-off to ensure, you know, your overall project success.
Okay, so polling question 3. Again, the prompt is going to appear on your screen for you to provide a response.
All right, now the fourth phase of the project management lifecycle, control and tracking. The first bullet point here is having tracking, but no control over what you're tracking or control over the project itself. Now, an example here is having appropriate change management processes in place. You know, how oftentimes do, you know, additional requirements get added to a project that we've been alluding to all along throughout the presentation, but do you actually have a proper process in place, you know, that executive sponsor or the project management in place to say, like, no, we are not adding those requirements, or we are going to add those requirements, but you need to have appropriate sign-off from each of the key stakeholders. You know, and it's not just adding requirements. What if the change you're asking for is approved functionally, but that change is going to have a budget impact? What if that additional requirement you're asking for has a $10,000 implication? Do you still want to go through that? Do you have a process in place or approval in place to approve that additional expense, or are you letting, you know, project team members add those requirements and ultimately add to your project budget? Now, it's very, very critical. So both from a requirement and how it affects your schedule, but also just as importantly, you know, maintaining to that price and that budget that you were initially set out for doing this implementation. Secondly, within, you know, the control is issue resolution and escalation. Now, this goes back to the very first slide that we talked about in the initiation phase and having that project sponsor. Now, who do you raise those issues and, you know, escalations to? If your project manager isn't enough, you know, if that project manager is, whether he's being passive or there's political things going on, or there's just too many project managers who have their opinions about, you know, what should be done first, like, who is that ultimate person that you can issue that concern to keep the project on track? Again, this is where that, you know, proper change management controls and executive sponsors really come into play to keep your project tracking and under proper control to avoid, you know, further delays and costs or overburdening of your resources. Next is ineffective progress monitoring. You know, what are the main things that within a project you use to monitor a project? Usually, you know, a project plan of some sorts, whether it's Excel or any of the plethora of tools that are out there today, Teams and everything else, or, you know, a status report as well. So starting with the project plan, you know, are you keeping honest on the project plan? What does that project plan look like? Are you effectively monitoring all the tasks that are in there? Is it a project plan that has, you know, 20 lines with the key tasks, with the key dates and the resources who are completing those? Or do you have a 500-line project plan that just becomes so overburdensome to even take a look at that, you know, users become disinterested, confused, or there's so much detail that, you know, it doesn't get reviewed on a weekly basis, and there is not enough accountability to keeping towards those tasks and those timelines. You know, another risk that we see on the project plans, even for the ones that do have appropriate level of task, is that what we call the 80%, the 90% syndrome. You know, too often tasks are marked as 80 or 90%, meaning, you know, a significant amount of work has been done, but why is it missing from being 100%? And what is it going to take, and when is that 100% going to be reached? a lot of times that falls on your project manager as well as the owner of that particular task, but too often it stays on that 80% and you move on to the next task because like, oh, there's this one little thing that we need to do, and then we move on to the next requirement or the next task, and it just remains in that 80% phase, which ultimately leads to what we talked about on the previous slide, the testing interval. Well, you 80% configured and tested this, but you fully didn't vet out what you're trying to accomplish. So ensuring that you mark those tasks and you have the right sign-off on each of those tasks is critical to not get stuck in what we call that 80% syndrome. Next is having a status report that is misleading or infrequent status reporting. First, talking through the misleading piece. Status reports, they may be occurring on a weekly basis, but what exactly is being communicated during those status reports? Is it the progress that was being made in the tasks that you are going to accomplish in the following week? How often are status reports, a half an hour that you spend with the project team and, moods are great, progress has been made, and that's all it's bringing up? How oftentimes does the project manager leave out, what are the real risks? What are the concerns that are going on? Who isn't attending those meetings or who hasn't performed, their testing? Too often, only the good is spoken about in these meetings due to retaliation of your boss because, you're reporting only the good and you're afraid to really speak about the negatives, or various different reasons. So, you want to challenge both yourself and internally, but you also want to challenge your consultants as well. Ensure that those projects are being accurately and consistent with their status reporting. And second is, the frequency. How often are those status reports happening? Is it weekly? Is it biweekly? Is it only once a month? That really just comes down to the size of your organization, the product that you're implementing, and the schedules of all your resources, what makes fit for you. There is not a one frequency is the best for all. It really comes down to your particular project and what you're trying to accomplish. Sometimes at times that status report might be increased to daily. As we get closer to go lives, we have weekly or daily status meetings. Now, instead of being an hour each time for everyone's consideration and actually getting the task and testing done, it might be 15 minutes, but you're putting that 15 minutes on everyone's calendars to hold them accountable, talk about what was accomplished the day before and what exactly you're doing that day. And other times, weekly is sufficient, or if it's early on in the process, bi-weekly is fine. But again, this is something you should continually evaluate throughout the project to really figure out what makes sense for you and your project team to make sure that you're ultimately successful.
Another note on ineffective progress monitoring is we talked about having a project plan that you're reviewing. During your weekly status meetings, you'll have a status report. But oftentimes in a ERP solution, there's various different questions, concerns, problems that arise that don't necessarily relate exactly to a line item on the project plan. So you want to ensure that you have almost an action item tracker, a task tracker. What works great for these is a IT case management system. The ERP solution that you're selecting potentially has a case CRM functionality within it that you can use to track and monitor these one-off questions, problems that come up. And this is part of what you can address on, during the weekly status meeting. And the other beautiful thing about that is all users can access it. It's not in somebody's inbox that the rest of the project team can't see. It enhances the communication in the project. One other small note in tracking but not control. You want to ensure that you're empowering the key process leads to either one, be able to make a decision that needs to be made to move the project forward, or two, quickly escalate that issue and have a resource available to make that decision that needs to be made to move the project forward.
All right, so moving on to the final phase of the project management lifecycle, which is the project closeout. Now, in my opinion, this is just as important as any of the 5 steps that we talked through today, but it's most often overlooked one. How often do you evaluate your success? So too often, you hit your go live date, your users get out of the project mode, they go back into their day-to-day using the new system, but do you ever take a step back, whether it's a week after you go live, a month after you go live, or even further down the road after you've worked out the bugs, let's say quarterly after go live, but really evaluate, were we successful? Did we hit our go live date? Maybe, but did we exceed project budget? Did we lose a key resource because we pushed them too hard and did not consider their schedules or other factors on that project? Do you evaluate that success with your implementation team so that you can give them feedback so that the next phase that you perform that project is more successful the second time around? What did you miss? Did you miss requirements and sacrifice those requirements because you hit that project go live date? You really need to evaluate what you performed to be successful here. Next one is the project is not closed, and sometimes it never ends. So you had your go live date, you hit your January go live date that you worked so hard for and sacrificed so much time, schedules, and over the holidays you worked for. But then, the project team, it seems like it continues to go on and on. So although you're using the new system, you're still having those weekly status meetings. You're still adding additional functionality. There's not a clear cutoff on when that project actually ends, and you continue to stay, in this project mode. And there's too much dependence that's relied on, whether it be, your consultants that are performing administrative tasks for you, or your team is just not comfortable with to rip that Band-Aid off, and the project continues to linger on, even though you are live. You just need to have someone on that team really evaluate, where are we, when does this project end, where do we have a cutoff where we document the next phase of that project. And then finally, learnings are not captured or used for subsequent efforts. Now this is similar to the success not being evaluated, but having someone really document, what did we learn from this? Did we have the right type of resources on this? Did we pick the right date? Did we pick a date because of, pressures? What can we learn from this so the next time we do a project, whether it's an ERP, a marketing system, any system this applies, what did we learn? Too often, you're so focused on that go live date and hitting that schedule that you don't actually think about, what did we do wrong? And then you tend to repeat, doing the same mistakes over and over again in future implementations. And that's why, oftentimes this phase is overlooked, and you don't really take the time to really evaluate, what was done, what was missed, what can we do things better the next time around.
Yeah, just another note to the project is not closed, it never ends. So this is why it's so important early on in the planning phase when you're laying out your project team to really specify who the internal system administrator is going to be. Really have a strong IT type presence within your organization before you kick off a project like this. So you have somebody in-house after the project is completed that is able to maintain the ERP system. It's again, more times than not, throughout the ERP, implementation life cycle, there's a lot of different things that come up. So it's important to have that person in place before you even kick off the project to ensure that they're there throughout the project and they understand, kind of where you started and how you got to where you are, once the project is live. And that then allows you to have a resource internally that you're able to escalate issues to as they arise and are able to adequately address those issues. Another thing that's important is to make sure that the tasks that may have been reprioritized to more of a phase 2 rollout are documented and followed up on in the project closeout meeting. So we use that time to evaluate what was reprioritized and develop a plan then to roll those things out. You don't want users in the system continuing to use the system with a requirement or a deprioritized requirement that was never met. You want to ensure that you're putting a plan in place to make sure those concerns are addressed without, just forgetting about them and moving on, in the system.
So again, we're just bringing up, the key 5 phases of the project management lifecycle, just as another reminder. As you go through each of these phases, what are the key, risks to watch out for? So the next time that you choose to, implement new software, whether ERP or otherwise, you know what to look out for, so that you can be successful and be on the right side of that percentage. So again, project initiation, making sure you have a clear setup of that project, having the right controls in place, and having a project sponsor. Project planning, appropriate planning schedules, having a great project plan in place. Project execution, how are you executing that project? Have you tested all your requirements appropriately? Are all your interfaces and integrations complete? Project control and tracking, do you have an escalation point? Do you have a process in place to control future requirements that are coming in later into the project from not being added, or prioritizing those appropriately and having control over the cost? And finally, project closeout, taking that time to step back, officially close out that project, organize your thoughts and your requirements for that phase 2 if necessary, and really thinking about, were we successful? Did we do this right? What can we learn, and how can we apply this to future efforts? So we want to thank you for attending this webinar with us today. We know it's different from our, our usual presentations doing this virtually, but I think by now, we're getting pretty comfortable with, performing these over Zoom and the various telecommunication applications. We appreciate any questions you may have for us. We'd love for you to reach out to Jordan or myself. If you have any ongoing projects, or there's projects you're interested in, or if there's anything you want to talk to us about, our contacts are on the slide here, as you can see. Please shoot us an email. We would love to have a conversation with you.
I see I was able to make it through the meeting without my wife calling me, so that's good. So yeah, as Jim said, thank you for being with us today, and please reach out if you have any questions.